Hello everyone, my name is Amir Harith. I'm an Malaysian undergraduate student studying in SciencePo Paris campus Doha. So today I'll be doing KVR book review on one of my favorite books, World on Fire, How Exporting Free Market Democracy Breeds Ethnic Hatred and Global Instability. So this book basically attempts to study about the relationship between three powerful forces operating in the world we have known today, which are free market capitalism, democracy, and ethnic hatred. So this book tries to explain how free market democracy was turned to an engine of ethnic conflagration. And she argues that this ethnic issue came from a phenomenon she refers to as market-dominant minorities, which is about how ethnic minorities who, for different reasons, tend to dominate their own respective country's economy, and that comes at the expense of indigenous majorities around them. The examples could be Chinese as market-dominant minorities in many countries in Southeast Asia. That includes Myanmar, Indonesia, the Philippines, as well as Malaysia. That could be another reason why you should stay until the end of this video, because I'll touch about Malaysia at the end. Some other examples would be white in Latin America and many countries in Africa as a result of centuries of colonialism, Lebanese in West Africa, Kurds in former Yugoslavia, or Jews in post-communist Russia. So in this book, she tries to argue that how market-dominant minorities are one of the weaknesses in free market democracy, because it creates a paradox where free market capitalism concentrates wealth, often in spectacular amount, in the hands of rich minority, while democracy increases and empower the impoverished majority. As a result, the process to reach a successful free market democracy becomes the engine of potentially catastrophic ethno-nationalism, pitting the frustrated indigenous majority who are vulnerable to opportunistic vote-seeking politicians against the rich minority. So because of this, the existence of this situation, it is easy for demagogues to emerge and scapegoat the resented minorities by claiming to fight for the true owners of the nation. Now let's talk about the reasons why she wrote this book. She believes that the issue of free market democracy and ethnic violence are tied up with the issue of globalization process. And a lot of studies, she believes, either by globalization supporters or globalization critics, neglect the phenomena of market-dominant minorities that most of the time create complications in these societies. So usually, basically, globalization supporters would argue that markets in democracy are the universal prescription of the multiple ills in underdeveloped nations. They argue that democracy, arguably the fairest political system that respects individual liberty, and free market capitalism, which is the most efficient economic system, are the solution for the world problems such as ethnic hatred or religious zealotry. For example, after 9/11 attacks at World Trade Center in the US, the globalization supporters argued that to solve the issue of terrorism and Islamic militant Islam is free market democracy. That's why they invaded countries like Afghanistan and Iraq, claiming to bring democracy in Middle East. However, Chua argues against this by saying that exactly by the opposite of that, or by contrast, the global spread of markets and democracy is a principal aggravating cause of this of ethnic violence throughout non-Western world. She posits that when free market democracy is pursued in the presence of market-dominant minority, the almost inevitable result is backlash. This backlash comes in three forms. First, backlash against markets, which targets the market-dominant minority's wealth. For example, in Zimbabwe, when they got independence in 1980s, 1% of the population, which were the whites, controlled 70% of the land. And Robert Mugabe exploited this situation and this condition for his own power by encouraging violent seizure of 10 million acres of white-owned commercial farmlands. So, so the response coming from the US and the UK was they tried to urge Mugabe to step down, and they called for free and fair elections. The irony is, Robert Mugabe was the product of democracy. That is exactly the problem, and that is exactly what Amir Chua tries to argue in her book. The second type of backlash is backlash against democracy itself. This type usually favors the market-dominant minority. So this book explains about different notorious cases of crony capitalism that diminishes the power of democracy, which means that it is easy for this market-dominant minority to somehow exploit the economy for their own sake, and comes at the expense of the democratic development. The third kind of backlash, which is the most ferocious one, is a genocide directed against the market-dominant minority itself. This was evident with minority Tutsis in Rwanda who were massacred by the majority, and another example would be ethnic cleansing of the Croats in former Yugoslavia. So apart from criticizing globalization enthusiasts, she also talked a little about the problems we have with critics of globalization studies. This is another reason why she wrote this book. So Western critics of globalization always have the tendency to see the problems of wealth and poverty in terms of class conflict, not ethnic conflict, which might be true in Western societies. So she's trying to bring a new perspective or the new realities of how developing world works, and the proposals to solve issues in these countries cannot, and the way to solve the issues in this developing world cannot neglect the ethnic elements in this country, or other reasons like religious aspects or whatsoever. Now I'll talk about my personal opinions about this book. I think this book is super interesting, as it brings a new perspective to me on how to analyze globalization, especially in the context of multiracial or diverse societies. I believe this book is extremely relevant to understand Malaysian history as well. For instance, the 1969 race riot, mainly between the Chinese and Malays in Kuala Lumpur, was an example of clash between free market capitalism and democracy. And our government solution to this problem was the introduction of new economic policy, where Malaysian government adopted sweeping ethnic quotas for Malays with corporate equity ownership, university admissions, government licensing, and commerce employment, which as a result reduced tension between these two ethnic groups. If we get the message coming from this book, she's trying to promote the idea that if we follow the common ideas of policies that had been implemented in Western societies, which are totally different from developing nations like Malaysia, our Malaysian society right now could have been very, very different. That is to say, the situation in underdeveloped or developing world is a lot more complex because identity politics are still strong and prevalent. If we keep on following the West or international institutions' proposals, probably our history could have been filled with bloods, right? Bloods, we never know. So clearly, Amir Chua's work is an important contribution to the study of international relations, because she provides an alternative nexus to the shortcomings of globalization. As she argued that even Malaysians, we have the tendency to observe outcomes of implemented policy from a high ground view as opposed to the ground level, which means we tend to analyze not in details. So this difference in worldviews increases the probabilities of skewed perceptions of reality in these societies. So the result is the continued implementation of legislation and policies that continue to negatively affect the very people we are trying to help, right? In these highly complex societies. However, I still believe there is a problem in regard to how Amir Chua cherry-picked cases to support her arguments, right? Because globally speaking, democracy in general causes a decrease in systematic violence in many cases, right? And the cases that Amir tried to bring in this book is somehow like minor in comparison to many successful cases. So I think more or less there's a bias in regard to how Amir chose the stories that she wants to tell. But in general, I think this book is still great and impactful in regard to in international relations field.